Thanks for joining us here on the Pinedo Brothers Podcast, where we're working to revitalize the world of Catholic art. Our guest today is doing much the same. You've probably seen him more than a few times.
Ivan was blown into 23 pieces. Who cares?
And we're talking about a fun hypothetical, GK Chesterton versus the woke mob.
I got this.
Enjoy.
All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Pinedo Brothers Podcast. I'm JP. My brother Peter is again not with us. He's out learning how to serve our country a little bit better at military training camp. But we got a great guest with us here today. Actor extraordinaire Kaiser Johnson. Kaiser, thanks so much for joining me.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I will do my best to serve as Peter's replacement, to replace him always.
Don't you worry about that. Kaiser, you're one of the most interesting people I know. So we're gonna. It's not gonna be. It's not a contest. You know, it's just a conversation that we're enjoying together. So Kaiser, you and I met while we both were living in Crazy Town, otherwise known as Hollywood. Mm-hmm. And we both exited. You beat me to exiting just a little bit before we uprooted the family. But I think you're a little closer. You're able to get back into Hollywood a little quicker. We're over.
Yeah, I mean, since we left, we've been back 3 or 4 times for jobs and stuff. So it's really not too bad. It's like a 6-hour drive, and remarkably, our kids are at just the right age where they're somehow up for that. So that's great.
Nice. Yeah. And folks, some of the things that you might have seen Kaiser in, Unplanned, the great pro-life film, and as well as Stranger Things. You might have heard his voice inside Transformers, just to name a few of the faves that I've seen you in. And then he's also the author of a great book that you probably heard me talk about in the past, How to Be Miserable and Alone, or Discover a Life That Truly Matters, one of the two. This is one of my favorite reads of recent, I guess the past year I read it and just loved it.
End of all time.
Well, yeah, I guess so. There is something to be said about that. I really enjoyed it. But maybe we talk about that a little bit later. I wanted to dive back in because dive right into our main topic for conversation here. We're talking about Chesterton. And folks, we got a great person to talk Chesterton. I don't know, you're probably not the current head of the Hollywood Chesterton Society.
I mean, I think I technically still am. I just haven't had many meetings of late. So, yeah.
Well, it's a great society of Chestertonians that gather in Hollywood, where we would gather with you, and back when we were both in Hollywood. But there's a vibrant Chesterton society all over the country. I mean, there was recently a Chesterton conference where hundreds of people gathered in Milwaukee just this weekend. So this guy is current to our times, and I'm excited to be talking Chesterton with a Chesterton expert here. Can you tell me, do you think that Chesterton would be canceled? And if so, what would he be canceled for?
So, well, that's actually an interesting question because, good job. Because
thank you. I'll pat my
Yeah, he's certainly his thinking, the way that he thinks, and the way that and the topics that he writes about, and are certainly out of step with modern woke culture, or PC culture of 20 years ago, and actually, to be honest, in his day too, he was he was not in step with current thought. I mean, he wrote the book Heretics, basically to critique all the wrong thinking that he saw around him. And then orthodoxy too is kind of a response to, well, in particular to one critic who I think the critic's name was G.H. Street or something like that. And he said in critiquing Heretics, he said, I will be more inclined to listen to Mr. Chesterton's critique of my philosophy when he will tell me his. And Chesterton said in response in the introduction to Orthodoxy, he said, it was perhaps an incautious suggestion to make to someone so inclined to write books upon the feeblest provocation. He writes Orthodoxy to go, here's, if you asked for it, here's my philosophy, and here's what I think. Here's how I thought I would invent the perfect religion by picking all the right components, and I invented the perfect religion, and then I found out 2,000 years earlier someone had beat me to the punch. So, yeah.
Yeah, and besides that, I have a sneaky suspicion that Chesterton might have been a little uncomfortable for both sides. Because you think about it, he was a staunch defender of orthodoxy, obviously. We love him for that, for being able to show how timeless truths are very provable, and if not the most logical thing you've ever heard, one of. but
Yeah.
he also could offend a lot of people. I mean, he was one of those prototypical heavy drinker, smoker, like to make biting jokes at everyone's expense. He was not a huge fan of the Germans or the Spanish. He was very much an Englishman. So I think he probably would have offended some of the most orthodox of today as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, he certainly, I think he was a larger than life person and personality. There's that anecdote of him trying to hurriedly get into a cab, and the cabman says, well, sir, perhaps have you tried sideways? And he said, I have no sideways. And just that he's, and then again, his philosophy, I mean, one of the big reasons that he's rarely taught in schools anymore, besides just being out of step with current cultural norms and that kind of thing, is that he doesn't fit neatly into any subject. He's a philosopher, but an amateur philosopher. He's a theologian, but an amateur theologian. He's a playwright, but he only wrote 3 plays. He's a novelist, but his novels are more like metaphysical musing than they are novels, and so he doesn't fit neatly into any category. But he's got this well of philosophy, of personality, of everything that's in there. And one of the things that, again, I think made him hard to cancel even in his day, because there was cancellation of sorts that happened back then too, of people losing jobs and all that kind of stuff. Maybe not to the degree that we have it now, but was that Chesterton was someone who was so in love with his neighbor as much as himself, that no one could remain his enemy. They might think they were when they read a piece of his and stuff, and then they would write to him about it, and he'd write back to them about it, or they'd have a debate or something like that. And some of his most bitter philosophical rivals were his best friends. You look at George Bernard Shaw or H.G. Wells, who had, and a massive part of Heretics is taking H.G. Wells and George Bernard Shaw to task over how wrong they are about certain things, and yet they're also the closest of friends. I mean, those are his best, 2 of his best friends, and so it's fascinating to see that you can't, if you give him a chance, you can't remain enemies with Chesterton.
I didn't even realize that. That's fascinating. That's quite a trick. Especially now. I mean, it seems like it's harder and harder to be friends across aisles with people that you disagree with. That's something that I enjoyed, at least in the beginning, about living in Hollywood, is that I could be friends with someone that I radically disagreed with, and it did become more difficult. What was your experience with that then and now? Have you seen a shift?
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the reasons I still had no problem being friends with people who I radically disagreed with. But they got a lot more radical. There was less and less common ground that we could agree on. And most of them had a harder time, if they ever understood, really where I was coming from. Well, no, if they started to understand the fringes of my way of thinking and stuff like that, they had a hard time being friends with me. And if they were, but if they took the time to actually listen to the way that I saw the world and that kind of thing, they didn't have a hard time remaining friends with me, nor I with them. But I think that, in Orthodoxy, Chesterton talks about this almost this inoculation against religion, that he grew up, in this nominally Christian society. And so there's this idea that he knows what Christianity is all about and that kind of thing. So he's almost inoculated against it and doesn't realize as he's inventing the perfect religion, where he's like, there'd be miracles and magic because that's something that's real, and there'd be gratitude, and there'd be this sense of rebellion all the time, and that we're soldiers fighting a war, but this war for good, and a good that hasn't been seen since some time preternatural and stuff, and so that he can come up with this religion, but not realize that it's Christianity. And I think there's that too, that we have such this tendency and this desire in our modern day to only engage the straw man of what we believe someone else believes, instead of actually giving them a chance to speak for themselves. Mm-hmm. And so I think we run into that a ton, and having most of our socialization, is particularly in the last year, but for a large portion of the last 5 years, 10 years, take place in comment boxes and on things where you can't really sit down. You're not sitting down. You're not having a conversation. You're just, firing salvos back and forth. It makes it harder and harder. Easier and easier to believe that a straw man is the real thing, and harder to say their philosophy is, because the way that you say it is easier to dismantle. Yeah. So that was a super long answer.
Well, it was a great answer.
I don't know if it even really gets to the heart of the question. What's that?
It was a great answer. It makes me think of so I'm a huge baseball fan, and when I lived in Los Angeles, growing up in Houston, I am a huge Astros fan, which is the baseball team in Houston. And I would go to Dodger Stadium when they were in town, and I love the Dodgers, but of course I love Houston more. And the Dodgers fans, especially as of late, hate the Astros, hate the Astros fans. And I remember there was this one time I was sitting next to a guy who was I was wearing my Astros t-shirt, and he was at the beginning belligerently angry at me for being an Astros fan and being there, and very, very, it was a very uncomfortable situation, And then as the game wore on, though, a couple innings in, the sport lasts a long time. It's hard to keep animus going that long. And after, you're crammed in there, the seats are, you're shoulder to shoulder. It's hard to be belligerent with someone that you're shoulder to shoulder with for that long, because you're right there. You realize that, oh, this is a person, this is something that this is a guy just like me who's here to watch a game and drink a beer and have a couple of hot dogs. So the idea of how in this modern time we can be extremely hostile to someone, to hundreds of people, and never have to see their face, never sit shoulder to shoulder with them, never have to stare them in the eye and say all these nasty things. It does open us up quite a bit to dehumanize, we've never dehumanized before.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I remember reading listening to a screenwriting teacher named John Truby, and he talked about the way that guns change an action film, and that suddenly it gives this, your action hero this almost omnipotence that you have to fight against, because they can just deal death indiscriminately. And there's something, I think, to be said of this huge danger that we run into as we, in engaging people online and that kind of thing, deal philosophical death indiscriminately, and the surge of superhuman strength that it's tempting to feel as you go, I can just blast away at people and I'll let them all know my thoughts and tear them down, and watch how many retweets I get, and how does that boost our own ego, and just that there's this, we have become destructive in a capacity that we did not have the ability to do before. It's
true, but that's something that's happened many times. Like you were saying, guns, they gave us that capacity. So did bombs, and so did, atomic missiles and things like that. Like we humans have that capacity, and just because we have that capacity doesn't mean that ultimately we exercise it. I think this is a time where we're like this podcast right now, this conversation isn't possible just 5 years ago. This is something that we couldn't do. So there is something I think it will level out, is what I'm saying. There is the capacity that you can dehumanize, but there's also a capacity that you can exchange thoughts like you've never been able to. You can have conversations you've never been able to have. So I'm a little bit optimistic as to what we can do with it. I don't know. We might destroy ourselves, but we thought we were going to destroy ourselves with the atomic bomb. We thought we were going to destroy ourselves many times before. I don't think chat rooms are going to be what ultimately takes us down.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that. I guess what I'm saying is that it is this thing that it does create the opportunity for either if you're not aware of what's going on, to kind of casually dehumanize hundreds of people all at once, but that doesn't mean that has to be how it's used. So I agree with you 100% on that.
Yeah. There's I wanted to bring up one of my, let's see, Chesterton is interesting because you mentioned earlier how he was that ultimate rebel. He's always the idea of rebellion, and that strikes a chord with me big time. And it strikes a chord with a lot of people in this thing. I mean, there's a lot of rebels out there, and I think that's epitomized perfectly in Napoleon at Notting Hill.
Sure. Yeah.
That's the film. If I could choose one film to make a movie out of, it would be Napoleon at Notting Hill, because that's the ultimate rebels film.
Yes. Yeah.
But I was reading a fascinating book about Chesterton, or not about Chesterton, but written by Chesterton, called The Flying Inn. I remember texting you about it last year. And that's got to be the perfect book to read in 2020. Because it's all about how England, in some future time, the prime minister decides to outlaw alcohol, which for Chesterton, that's a big deal. This is intense, guys. I mean, cheers. So I thought maybe if you would indulge me a bit, I could read a section of it, and then we can talk about maybe one of the reasons why Chesterton would get canceled.
Okay.
So one of the main characters is here, and he's on the run from the law because he's decided that he's not gonna stop drinking alcohol, and he's not gonna follow the new laws, and he's going to actually allow other people to be breaking the law as he's breaking the law through drinking alcohol. And so he addresses people, a group of people at a roadway. Gather, peaceways, shouted Patrick, still banging on the can and lamenting the difficulties of adapting McGregor's gathering to the name and occasion. We're landless, peaceways. 2 or 3 of the goat-clad, recognizing Mr. Hugby with a guilty look, drew near with great caution, and the captain shouted at them as if they were an army covering the Salisbury Plain. Citizens, he roared, saying anything that came to his head. Try only the original unadulterated mountain milk, for which alone Muhammad came to the mountain. The original milk of the land flowing with milk and honey, the high quality of which could alone have popularized in so unappetizing a combination. Try our milk. No others are genuine. Who can do without milk? Even whales can't do without milk. If any lady or gentleman keeps a favorite whale at home, now's their chance. The early whale catches the milk. Just look at our milk. If you say you can't look at the milk because it's in the can, well, look at the can. You must look at the can. You simply must. When duty whispers, thou must, he bellowed at the top of his voice in a highly impromptu peroration. When duty whispers, thou must, the youth replies, I can. And the word can He hit the can with a shocking and shattering noise, like a peal of a demoniac bell of steel. This introductory speech is open to criticism from those who regard it as intended for the study rather than the stage. The present chronicler, who has no aim to save truth, is bound to record it for its own unscrupulous purpose. It was extremely successful. A great mass of citizens of peaceways, having been attracted by the noise of one man shouting like a crowd, there are crowds who do not care to revolt. There are no crowds who do not like someone else to do it for them, a fact which the safest oligarchs may be wise to learn. But Dalroy's ultimate triumph, I regret to say, consisted in actually handing to a few of the foremost of his audience some samples of his blameless beverage. The fact was certainly striking. Some were paralyzed with surprise. Some were abruptly broken, double with laughter. Many chuckled. Some cheered. All looked radiantly towards the eccentric orator. And yet the radiance died quietly and suddenly from their faces, and only because one little old man had joined the group, a little old man in white linen, with a white pointed beard and with white powder puff of hair like thistledown, a man whom almost every man present could have killed with their left arm. Dr. Moses Meadows, whether that was his name or an anglicized version of it, had certainly come in the first instance from a little town in Germany, and his first 2 books were written in German. His first 2 books were his best, for he began with a genuine enthusiasm for physical science, and this was adulterated with nothing worse than a hatred of what he thought was superstition, and what many of us think is the soul of the state. The first enthusiasm was notable in the first book, which was concerned to show that in the female not unsprouting of the whiskers was from therewith increasing arrested mentality derived. In his second book, he came more to grips with delusions, and for some time he was held to have proved, to everyone who agreed with him already, that Time Ghost had been walking particularly rapidly lately, and that Christus Mythos was by the alcoholic mind trouble explained. Then, unfortunately, he came to an institution called Death and began to argue with it. Not seeing any rational explanation of this custom of dying, so prevalent among his fellow citizens, he concluded that it was merely traditional, which he thought meant effete, and began to think of nothing but ways to evade or delaying it. This had a rather narrowing effect on his mind, and he lost much of that acrid ardor which had humanized the atheism of his youth. Then he would have almost committed suicide for the pleasure of taunting God with not being there. And this man is in charge of a country. I could go on quite a ways, but I don't want to indulge myself too far. But this man is in charge of a country, they find out, who he is the only one authorized to sell the milk. And our hero here, Patrick, is committed the great sin of selling milk infused with alcohol. And for that, he must be bound in irons, if you might remember. I'm sure you've read the book.
I have. If I remember correctly, though, this guy, Moses Meadows, he's got the same scam going, right? And it's alcohol infused milk, right? Or no, it's not. It's just
milk. It's milk with water.
Oh, okay, milk with water. Okay,
milk with water.
And but is Dalroy selling the milk, or he's just giving it away?
That's what saves him in the end, is that Moses is trying to get the milk, to get him for selling milk, and it turns out he was giving it away. He didn't get any money for it. Right. And so he managed to squeak out in the end. What was so important to me is how this guy is so interested in cheating death, as conquering it almost, and he's in charge of keeping a whole country in chains and shackles. And maybe this is an unpopular opinion, but I sure feel like I'm seeing that with, not being able to go to church much last year because of lockdowns in Los Angeles, and people being forced to wear masks, and all of these things that, this video will probably get stifled by Google for saying. But death has been a part of us for a long time. And that's something that Chesterton is very free and easy with saying, is that people die. And it's not something to rejoice about, maybe, but it's also something that is human and natural. And this unholy obsession with trying to defeat death by a scientific means, by some sterile and unlively way of living,
Right.
is something that he would have revolted against immediately. I'm sure he would have been writing quite a bit of this effect, given if he had lived in 2020. Your thoughts?
So, so that's anytime I try to guess what Chesterton would have said in a particular circumstance, I really hesitate to do that. I will look at what he has said in
Wise man.
and see if it applies. But I mean, I've heard people say, and I quote, like, "I'm sure Chesterton would think this, XYZ about, and use their love of Chesterton to, sort of try to give him the credit or the blame for whatever they think is right." And I mean, from everything to being like, Vatican II wasn't a real council, to Donald Trump is the only true president ever, to the things on the opposite side too, and so I'm really hesitant because those smack as false to me. Like, I have a hard time buying their reasoning that when I hear it. So I think certainly I think what is undeniable is that Chesterton supported subsidiarity and as much freedom and independence granted not to the individual, but to families. Because Chesterton thinks that people who believe that in individual freedoms, there's also an issue there, that they've got it right, but not all the way right. And certainly he also sees this great value in life and life lived. And I think you're right. Obviously, this is a critique of this kind of idea of both of medical professionals who think that their whole purpose is to delay death, and government officials who believe that their purpose is to medically protect the community. I mean, because this is one of the big things of the flying in is okay. Certainly, we know that drinking's not like good for you, but from like a medical standpoint, like Chesterton got it understood that in 1916 or whatever he wrote or 1918, whenever he wrote the Flying In, like he drinking's like not objectively beneficial to your body, but he's going, but the thing is, it's so good for the soul if it's done right. And he has a whole treatise about how to drink rightly, to drink, never drink when you're miserable, because that's death and doom and all those kind of things. But
I live by that.
Drink when you're happy, because that's the ancient wisdom and wealth of the world. And
when I read that, I quit drinking when I was upset.
It's never. Only makes you worse,
right?
So I think you're certainly right that there are. I think it's undeniable that there are things in the way that the COVID-19 response has been handled, especially in places like Los Angeles and the United States in general, and that kind of thing, that Chesterton would find fault with. I have no doubt of that. I think he might find, he might find fault too amongst the people who are so belligerently just for personal freedom at the expense of anyone else that they go, they do this weird echo of that woefully wrongheaded pro-choice argument, my body, my choice, and abuse it just as much to go, I owe nothing to my neighbor, I owe nothing to my family, I owe nothing to the vulnerable amongst us, and what I do is my own personal business. I think Chesterton would find as much fault with that as with all these top-down government mandates and medical professionals running society. I think you're right that he would find fault with those. I think he'd also find fault with people who rebelled to the opposite extreme. It's the wrong kind of rebellion.
Well, he would say that you're your brother's keeper, buddy. Right. Yeah. He would say it much more witty than I could say it, but he would say it. Because that's an undeniable tenet that we live by, is that, yes, I mean, when Cain asked God that, he was, yes, the answer comes back, yes, you are. Your brother's blood cries out from the ground.
Yeah. He's got the great line where he says that the Bible tells us to love our neighbors, and the Bible tells us to love our enemies. Frequently because they're the same people.
They're the same people, yes.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah, no, we are responsible for the weak and vulnerable among us, which makes it a very tricky decision when we're talking about things like the vaccine, to decide, okay, well, we have to watch out for those that are vulnerable. It's not just open and shut. This is just, it's my way. Right. Yeah, but I would stand by. Chesterton would have a very hard, like for what you said, the top-down type of government.
Right.
The rebellious.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, his one of the things that he appreciated so much about the United States was this understanding in there that that it is God who grants rights, and that people confer rights back to the government. The government does not confer rights to people.
Yes. Yes.
It is the object of the government to protect the rights of the citizens, not to grant them rights, and that families are what make up society, and so they grant rights to the government, not vice versa.
And not to change the subject too much, but this is perfect time to bring up. I loved your book. And my favorite part of that book was when you're talking about your family, when you're talking about the joy of raising your family. That's something that got me thinking about what our story is. I brought that up in our podcast when we read that section of your book, in particular. Our story is so joyful when we have these families to draw from. And obviously we must have a family. We come from somewhere. And there are those of us that maybe are orphans and that don't have an immediate family, but that which is the greatest joys that I am able to enjoy these days are being able to hold my son. And that's what you spoke about when you're holding your daughter, and the idea of that is, when I'm thinking about art, that is what will attract people to us as we're creating now, is ideas like that. And now more than ever, that's going to resound. This is a great time, I feel. What is your sense of art and the creation of it in this day and age by people like us?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that you talked about there, it really has jumped out to me recently of, and I'm already forgetting how you said it, but in the sense of like, the joy of life and in the joy of family, and that, certainly tragedy and, and, pulpit pieces and that kind of thing can speak to a certain audience and can scare people into behaving a certain way or that kind of thing. But I judge that joy shared and the ability to there's this beautiful line that Chesterton has where and I think more than any of the fires of hell, it has allowed me this attitude has allowed me the ability to turn away from sin. I'm not saying I always turn away from sin. I very frequently do not. But what I mean is that joys of heaven more frequently than the pain of hell inspire me to turn away from sin. And one of the ones with this line of Chesterton's is there, and I think it's in Orthodoxy. It's in the Eternal Revolution, where he says, in our story, there is the possibility that at any moment we may strike a blow for perfection not seen since Adam. Mm-hmm. And it's like, instead of asking it, and I know I mentioned this in both of my books, but that instead of asking, what harm will X, Y, or Z do, is what good can I do?
Right.
And that, even in the good that people seek to do so often, it's like, why is there so much? How can it possibly be good if you do it with such anger? Mm-hmm. You see
the outrage.
The outrage that's always surrounding, people's protests and people's, their telescopic philanthropy. What is that? Is that what it's called? And virtue signaling and all this kind of stuff where we just want to be mad about something and we want to get people to do our way of things. And it's like, how is that inspiring to anyone? I'll give you a hint. It's not. No one is inspired by that. No. And so as storytellers, if we do these big shame pieces and and stuff like that, people are not compelled by that. People are compelled by this vision of what life can be and the joy that we can experience. I think there's such a call towards to that, to not dystopia, but utopia, and not in the sense of we can make our own heaven on earth.
Right. A realistic vision.
Yeah, but the good of things done well for good, not the the tragedy of everything falling apart. So again, super roundabout kind of response to that, but there you go.
Well, no, I 100% resonates with me, because think about it. This is an unusual time. In the past, and this is an unfair casting of the Orthodox position, which I would say that is the tenet that is foremost in my mind. And we can describe what orthodoxy is by perhaps reading the book Orthodoxy at some point. But
the whole thing in one.
Yeah, I'll it'll be about 5 or 6 podcasts put together. But okay, in the past, unfairly, those of the Orthodox persuasion have been pictured as the naysayers, those that are saying, "No, thou shalt not," and all of whatever iteration that is. But this is different. This is interesting. What's happening right now is cancel culture, where, for example, Bill Maher a couple days ago on his show he said basically, "What the F, guys?"
Yeah. Who would have guessed that Bill Maher would be the most conservative late night talk show host? I bet if you told Bill Maher that he would be the furthest right of any late night talk show host, if you had told him that 5 years ago, he would have said, "That's impossible."
But ta-da! He is not some Catholic like Stephen Colbert. It's Bill Maher that's calling it out and saying, "Guys, we're canceling people. This is happening, and it's for bogus reasons." And it's the left. It's the liberal left that's canceling people. And he is of the left, and he's saying it. Right. This is an unusual time where Orthodox Christians, or people that are Orthodox in general, the more conservative side, can embrace art, can embrace an open dialogue in a way that hasn't been done in the past.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that it also, perhaps the distinction should be made that certainly people who are of an Orthodox persuasion it is nearly impossible for them to be far right either. So we're not saying the antithesis of the people who are being critiqued here is far leftists, oh well, then that means that Fox News pundits and one One News America people, like that's where those are the very creative ones now, and that kind of thing. I think there's as much there's as much cancellation and ending and suicide of thought amongst the far right as there is amongst the far left.
Let me clarify who I'm talking about.
Yeah. No.
You've spoken about, I don't remember where, it might have been something that you wrote, or it might have been an interview that I came across of you, where you were talking about how you asked, what could Christians do to embrace artists or something like that. I forget exactly how the question was phrased. And what you said was, they should be a good consumer of art.
Yeah.
They should watch.
We need more producers of art. We need more consumers of art. Yes.
Right. They should watch films, watch good films, and demand good films, and be like, this is not you talking. This is me internalizing what you said. They should be out there being they should demand it, consume it, find it, seek it. They should go out and be openly looking for that which is good art, right. Good film, good movies, right. Good TV shows, good books, good whatever it is that's out there. There's so much that's out there. It's such an exciting time. This is a time when that audience that you're talking about there, when you mentioned them, they can be open to that which was just a few years ago considered liberal and left.
Right.
If we can, at this moment, I see an opening here where audiences like what you were talking about there can be, if it has to do a little bit of a shift, because traditionally these audiences were more closed off, and I can, when you were talking about when you mentioned that, I thought of many people that I know that you're talking about. Yeah. But if we can shift just a little bit here and say, look, tell me what you're thinking, what you're talking about. Tell me, okay, you have a different position than mine. Tell me about it. Let me hear what it is. Instead of shutting down the conversation, if we're open to those that the left is now casting out, like Bill Maher says, it's a purge. We can now see something which had not existed, like an opening where there can be a flowering of conversation, a flowering of art among those people that we're talking about, which could be our audience, which could be, those people that are out there that maybe all they've seen in the past are like God's Not Dead or things like that. They only go to the movie theater once a year to see that one film that's come out that, is very much, of a Christian faith-based film. But if we can say, look, let's listen. Let's see what's happening here. Let's be what's open. Not that we change our values. No, not at all. But let's welcome in those that are being cast out right now. I think it's a very interesting time that could lead to quite a flowering of art.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing about the church. Chesterton has a great line where he says the church is bigger on the inside than it is on the outside, and that there's this. And I think art is that way because if God is truth, beauty, and goodness, and that you find. I think you can. That true art is all of those things too. Chesterton says art is the signature of man. And that's because it's the signature of God. That creation is what we're made for, and being a sharer in creation. And so that we take on this great responsibility in making art, that it should be true and good and beautiful, so that it should welcome in those who are cast out and disenfranchised and that kind of thing. So, which actually now that I come to think of it, that's a fascinating thing too, about how is this conversation that so much of Hollywood and stuff is having with diversity in art and in film and in television, and not just diversity of skin color, but diversity of opinion and it's like and background and that kind of thing, and how there's really an opportunity for that in the truest sense of the word, for art to be a home for anyone for everyone who will come to it. Anyone who seeks truth, beauty, and goodness has a home in art and should be able to find something that speaks to their soul there. And so art is made for you if that's who you are. It ought to be. And so that's a ramble. That's not even an answer to or a response. That's just you're just hearing what I'm thinking as I'm thinking it.
It's just two friends chatting. That's all.
Yeah.
I wanted to, I know we're running short of time, but I had a question for you that I wanted to get your opinion on.
Mm-hmm.
There's always meccas, the centers of art. And,
Sure.
we previously lived in what I would call the modern day Mecca, where
Mm-hmm.
it's the modern day Paris, the modern day Vienna.
Mm-hmm.
We lived in Los Angeles. We you lived in Hollywood. I lived in Hollywood for a bit. It was messy then, and it's even messier now. In my mind, I think that city is the great exodus that's happening. It's not just you and I. It's many,
Right.
many people that are leaving it because of how unbearable it's becoming to live there.
Yeah.
I think that city is dying. I think that they're always meccas, though. I'm curious. What do you think that Hollywood is still the Mecca? And if not, what is going to take its place?
It's interesting because in the last, since 2008, things have become so more decentralized, that it's like LA's the big one, but 3/4 of the primetime shows don't shoot in Los Angeles, they're scattered across, Atlanta, and there's some in New York, and there's some in North Carolina, and there's some in Nashville, and there's
Canada is growing like gangbusters.
Canada, Vancouver, and Toronto, and Albuquerque, and that film production, television production have moved all these different places, and so is it? Maybe we will see another rise of one place that does it, but I think that there's such flexibility and such mobility of what we're doing now that it's for people to what drives that every time is like tax incentives. If you can
Right.
get 40% of the cost of making your movie back, why wouldn't you shoot there, or New Zealand, or Australia, or London, and stuff like that. And so so producers are doing that to keep more money. And so and with the way that technology has changed, you can make films that look just as good as anybody else's, and you can make them anywhere on a much lower budget, as long as you're not trying to do hundreds of millions of dollars of CGI. And most of the most interesting movies aren't trying to do that. So,
And they might not, look how Black Widow bombed in the box office.
yeah,
That might, the age of that type of film might be over. I don't know. I'm not saying that I know that for sure, but it's a great time if you're not making a blockbuster.
right. And so I would be really excited to see, and I hate speculating. I'm someone who, I hate gambling, I hate speculating, anything, but just I just wonder, what if we see again this is sort of a more distributist model of film and television making, and again, right now you still have the actual distributors being 2.5 companies,
Right.
and so there's still a challenge there when it comes to you've still got.
Yeah, but my hope is that COVID might democratize that.
Yeah.
I think there's a possibility that happens.
So that's kind of what I wonder if that will happen, and I do have a hope towards that.
Yeah.
So
Well, I actually want to piggyback on what you said. It occurred to me today, and I've always thought that there will be a center of artistic endeavor. I have that vision of the Paris where there's the artists that are in the cafes, and they're talking and they're influencing each other, and they're saying, what are you working on? And they're shouting and yelling, and those cafes are the milieu for which they go back and they create out of it, and it's how they're influencing each other. That's what I think of when I think of the center of artistic production.
yeah.
And I'm wondering if this conversation is a perfect example of it. If maybe in this day and age, it's going to be a digital mecca where somehow we're all connected. There's some platform where artists are able to connect with each other and influence each other, but then they're able to create and do what they're doing from wherever. Like, we're in Houston, you guys are way out, further states away from us. So it's just an idea of we're connected in a different way, a different center. I'm wondering if that might be the solution.
Yeah. That'd be interesting too. And but I think one thing you latched on there. I mean, when you talk about like the cafes and the thing, one thing that is, I think, true about Los Angeles is it's still like, like everyone you bumped into was involved in entertainment in some way, or wanted to be,
Right.
But at the heart of it, what that comes down to is, like, there's this beautiful ability to connect with people who are artists, but it really comes down to connecting with people and connecting with their visions. And I think if we seize the opportunities to connect with other people and connect with their visions, and go, can I get on board with that vision too, or are they getting on board with a vision that I have of the art that needs to be made? Then it gives us remarkable opportunity for anywhere to be a mecca of creation and people not only working as artists as individuals, but artists in community. And so I think that's the powerful thing, is that people with a shared vision. So I think that is something to seek and to search for. So
it's an exciting time. I think there's so much opportunity here. I don't know if Peter and I are going to be the filmmakers that are able to take advantage of this opportunity, but there will be amazing voices coming. I'm convinced of it. This is a time for indie filmmakers to really work and get their work to be seen. But I know we're running out. I wonder if do you mind sharing with us what's next for Kaiser Johnson?
Sure. So let's see, what is next? So certainly, there's more stuff coming with Catholic Central, which is something that I do, which is the online series. I've been doing a lot of voiceover, so that's coming out. Probably the best way, first, I'm going to make a quick plug for my website, and then I will get back to just actually talking about it in person. So Kaiser-Johnson.com.
I'll put a link in the description.
Johnson, yeah. And then my Instagram @Kaiser Johnson and my Twitter @Kaiser Johnson are the best ways to kind of stay immediately up to date. But
I'll link everything in the description, folks.
My wife Keely and I are really trying to hone in on how do we do just what we've been talking about right here, is go, look, how do we democratize this creation of content, and how do we do more true good and beautiful art? And so right now we're working on writing a pilot. We have another pilot that we've already written and are looking to shoot, and to just go, again, we don't need to be a certain place to do this. We don't need to, how do we just go, look, we're going to create things that are true, good, and beautiful, and we know there's an audience for that. And and also everything that we're doing right now is also very funny. So it's not true, beautiful, and good in a stodgy way. So so we're doing that, and then I'm writing another book, and then also I'm writing a fiction book, a pulp adventure series. So
that'll be exciting to read.
Yeah,
I said watch. Hopefully we get to watch it one day too.
I mean, that's my the end goal. So I was talking about this recently, is it all came because I wanted to open a bar. and then I was like, yeah, but I want the bar to have a story associated with it. And I would like it to be like like a bar that is there's like movies that you could watch about the stuff in this. And then it's like, well, but I want to write the stories okay, well, I guess I'll start by writing the stories. And so it's all just
Disney has made a lot of money off that kind of thought progression. So
yeah, well, that's true. So yeah, it's going to be an intellectual property. So
I can't wait to read it and then watch it. That sounds awesome.
So.
Well, folks, I hope everyone you get a chance to check out Kaiser's book. It's a great read. How to Be Miserable and Alone or Discover a Life That Truly Matters. It's worth it. And Kaiser, thank you so much for chatting. I'll link to everything you just mentioned in the description. Yeah, absolutely.
It's always my pleasure talking to you. So
I hope we get to talk again soon, brother.
So do I.
Awesome. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here at the Pinedo Brothers Podcast. I'm JP. Everyone, I hope you are able to like, comment, and subscribe. We'd really appreciate it. And we'll see you all next time.